Probably one of the most useful videos for beginners, how to turn a drawing into a painting and get an outline on your canvas before you start. Let's see our first method, the grid. The grid method involves drawing a grid of the preparatory drawing and the painting surface. It's great for beginner level and those who don't necessarily trust their ability to keep the shapes and proportions in place on the canvas with a paintbrush. And it's also great for upscaling and downscaling. First, you want to start by drawing a grid over your original drawing. You want to use a ruler to divide the drawing into equal squares. The size of the squares can vary depending on the level of detail in your drawing and the size of your canvas, but try to keep the same number of squares. If your canvas is larger than your drawing, you can make the grid squares larger, but keep the same number of squares on both. Next, you draw an identical grid on your blank canvas. Use a light pencil for this so that the grid can easily be erased later. And now the whole idea of using a grid is that instead of dealing with the entire drawing at once, you chop it off in digestible parts. So each square becomes a tiny drawing that you have to copy, and you copy them all and put them all next to each other. But drawing in a grid is not so easy. You really want to pay attention to where the lines cross, also the negative shapes. You want to really place the elements within your grid accurately, because that's the whole point. We want to transfer exactly the same drawing that we had on the paper. We want to put it exactly on the canvas. And this is not necessarily easy. The grid helps break down a complex image into smaller, manageable parts, making it easier to replicate, but not easy to replicate. Once you have copied your entire drawing on your canvas, you can start painting. You can erase the grid or not. Next method, the dry transfer with tracing paper. Tracing paper is great for complex compositions where you need precise placement of the elements but don't want to spend too much time redrawing everything as you have to do with the grid method. So you start by placing a sheet of tracing paper over your original drawing. You want to secure the tracing paper with tape or by holding it down firmly with clamps so it doesn't shift while you work. Then by using a pencil, you carefully trace the outlines and any important details of the drawing that you want to remember. Be sure to press firmly enough so that the lines are clear and visible, but not so hard that you tear the paper, and you want to be gentle for the first one. Once the tracing is complete on one side, you want to flip it over first time. And you want to retrace it in the back with a soft lead, like a 2B pencil, for example. And we're doing this to keep the right orientation, otherwise the image will be flipped. Then you flip it over a second time so that the side with the 2B pencil marks is facing down against your canvas. You position it carefully on the canvas in its final position, and then you use a pencil or a stylus to rub over the traced line from the back, pressing firmly, but not necessarily too hard. You can even scratch it off. At this point, it doesn't really matter. It's just the pressure that will help print the lines on the canvas, leaving a faint outline of your drawing on the canvas. Once the transfer is complete, you can remove the tracing paper and you have something very light. If the lines are too faint, you can go over them again with a colored pencil, this time to make sure that everything is clear and visible. Next method, the oil transfer. In the same category, also using tracing paper, we have the oil transfer. You start exactly the same way, except that when your first tracing is done, you flip it over a first time and apply this time a thin layer of raw umber paint over the outline. Then you flip it a second time and carefully, without pressing your hand on the tracing paper, you carefully follow the outline with a pen or a stylus. And really, you don't want to press at all on the tracing paper with your hand, so you want to use a maul stick or something to support your hand, or it will just leave a disgusting paint mark on your canvas. And when you're done, you let it dry for a day. Now let's go back in time and explore an ancient copy technique, which is the Spolvero. The Spolvero or pouncing is a traditional method that goes back to the Renaissance, but it's not used much anymore as it's destructive for the original drawing, as we'll see. You start by taking your original drawing and you place it on a soft surface like a sheet of leather or foam, something that can be pierced easily. Then using a needle or a sharp pin, you'll punch small holes along the main outlines of the drawing. And the difficulty is that the holes have to be spaced closely enough so that you can still see the drawing, but not so close that the paper tears. Next, you place the canvas flat and you put the drawing with the holes on top, and you want to make sure that your original drawing is taped at the right spot before you start, because during the entire process it really shouldn't move. Now you take a small piece of charcoal, graphite powder or soft pastel and you gently tap or rub it over the holes. As you do this, the powder will pass through the holes and leave a series of small dots on the canvas outlining the shape of your drawing, kind of like a connect the dots. Move the powder evenly across all the drawing to ensure that the entire drawing is transferred properly. And after removing the paper, you'll see a dotted outline on your drawing and you have to connect the dots with a pencil to complete the outline and make it usable. It's destructive, it's slow, it's unreliable, it's risky, so I really don't recommend that you use this one. Next one is the projector transfer. We're jumping ahead in time from the Renaissance to the modern world. Let's talk about projectors. You can use an art projector very easily to project the drawing onto your canvas. You have to adjust the size of your image by either using the zoom option or by just changing the distance between your canvas and your projector. Then you lightly trace the outline on the canvas and that's it. It's a very effective method for large-scale paintings when you have to really upscale a lot. The only downside is that you cast your own shadow with your hand when you draw, and also you have to be in a pretty dim room. Some people consider using a projector a form of cheating. I don't consider it cheating as long as the original drawing is made by you. If it's just helping you in your process, it's not necessarily cheating. But if you get the image that has been created by somebody else and you just steal with a projector, yeah, absolutely, it's just mechanical cheating. Method number 6 is to go freehand with a pencil on the canvas and draw the outline like that. The idea is that this time it's not a method of copying, but it's a method of just doing it again. You've already figured out the most difficult elements in your preparatory drawing. You simply have to do it again, and this time there's a chance that it will be even better. So this method gets a bonus for allowing you to improve your drawing as you switch to the canvas. You want to start very lightly because it's usually more difficult to erase lines on the canvas. You can start with graphite if you want, or charcoal. Charcoal is easier to erase on the canvas. Graphite is less easy, and after you're done, what I recommend is that you retrace with a cutted pencil, and I really recommend using cutted pencils that match with your underpainting cutters instead of using graphite or charcoal that both have a tendency to bleed and smudge in the paint. So this method is really effective for large canvases, working oils and acrylics. It's very versatile. So there is no mechanical way of transferring the drawing. You have to do it again, but you have the bonus of maybe improving it along the way. And let's talk about my final method, freehand drawing with a brush on the canvas. You can simply recreate your drawing. Same thing, you have to do it again, but you do it directly on your painting surface, this time by freehanding it with a brush. This approach will provide you with more flexibility in adjusting the composition. And you can still use a preparatory drawing for this, for the most important element, like I did here with the portraits. I don't need to waste time drawing the rest with graphite, as I can improvise it with my brush. I trust my ability to do that with my brush, and I like this way of combining a preparatory model for the trickiest areas, but freehand the rest. This flexible approach is ideal if you want to maintain the spontaneity of the freehand drawing and if you want to keep the option to make changes as you work. Also, as you can see, I don't use a full grid, but I like to keep my composition lines as a sort of a basic grid. So in my sketchbook, when I come up with my composition, what I like to do is I like to trace the thirds, and I try to put my main focus points around the intersections of the thirds. I also like to trace the center lines vertically and horizontally. One key thing is that I draw a sketch that has the same proportions as my canvas. So first I pick the canvas that I'm gonna do my work on, and then I trace a rectangle of the same proportions in my sketchbook. For example, if my canvas is 100 by 80 centimeter, so I'll trace a small frame in my sketchbook that's, let's say, 10 by 8. So I don't have to bother with tracing an annoying grid on my canvas, but I have sort of a minimalist grid. You can still see here, I have my top third right there, this third, center line, center line. Using these, I can locate a few key elements and make some very basic measurements that will help maintain the right proportions and copy it to the same size. I have sort of a minimalist grid that I can use to measure, upscale or downscale. However, note that it's easier if your drawing and your painting have the same size. Obviously in your sketchbook it's impossible, but if you make a preparatory drawing, it's generally a good idea to make the same size as the final subject in your painting. Will really help. For the key areas that were prepared with the drawing, I carefully measure and copy my study with a good freehand brush drawing. For the rest, rather than transferring the entire drawing, I use the preparatory drawing as a sort of a reference to blocking the major areas of light and dark using broad strokes, and from there I improvise. The focus is more on establishing the basic shapes and the forms than replicating the entire drawing. So I still have a lot of free range, and I can use a sort of a more spontaneous approach and go with the flow, let the brush dictate how the composition might go. I improvise for most of it. Everything is very easy and fluid when you have a brush, and drawing with a brush is actually a key skill that you'll need to master at some point if you want to paint seriously. Painting always erases the outlines, so you have to be aware of that, and you need to be as confident as possible with a brush, and be as confident with a brush as you are with a pencil. The idea is to draw again, but with paint and masses of colors instead of lines. You can never paint in between the lines. You have to draw the shapes again with masses of colors and with your paintbrush. That's why I don't recommend techniques that rely too much on linear work and mechanical copy, because ultimately you can have the perfectly traced outline on your canvas before you start and lose it as soon as you start with paint. So if you want to paint and improve, you need to see your brush as a drawing tool as well. Even at a pretty advanced stage in the painting, you should keep thinking about the drawing. How are the shapes? How are the proportions? Are they still right? How do the edges look? Can I make it happen with paint? That's why a lot of painters start with what's called an underpainting. And an underpainting is not really part of the painting, it's more some sort of a drawing, a dulled version of the final painting that focuses mostly on the shapes and the proportions, and then they only paint the chromatic accents, the details of the colors after letting it dry. But first, the underpainting focuses mostly on the shapes. So in a way, the underpainting is a part of the drawing process. And after the underpainting, you can continue to refine or add details by drawing directly into the wet paint with a thin brush or other tools to reintroduce the lines if needed, as sort of construction lines, construction marks with your paintbrush, or you can refine your composition. And the rest is just very organic. Once you have the right flow, once you learn how to draw with a paintbrush in your hand, it's very easy to switch from the drawing phase of the painting to the actual painting phase and start building up the layer, building up the thickness, and making these wonderful transitions and blended edges and chromatic accents that make painting so wonderful. Alright, that's it for this video, my friends. I recommend that you watch this one next, and I'll see you for the next one. Until then, joy and inspiration to you. Bye.